Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to get into all sorts of issues in this first hour. Then Gary Bauer will join us in the second hour. Again, an individual that served in Ronald Reagan's administration and has been not only the head for a number of years, the Family Research Council, but now, of course, American Values, also the chairman of the Campaign for Working Families. So we've got a lot to cover today, and I certainly want to give you an opportunity, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Going to run down a number of different stories, some of which you perhaps have not heard about, as we always like to do, and others that have been in the news, and try to give you a biblical perspective on it. And at any point, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let me, for just a minute, though, at least talk about the weather. This isn't something we talk about too often, but for our listeners in the East Coast, you are facing something called a bomb cyclone. Now, you've got to at least admit that that was a new word for you. It certainly was for me. I even took and sat in on a class on meteorology in graduate school, and I don't remember us talking about that at all. Although the class was more about computer simulations and those kinds of things, which, as a footnote, is one of the reasons why I have a little more skepticism about some of these computer models that have come out, even in the most recent years. And back then, we knew a lot less. But a bomb cyclone happens when a cyclone, which is a low-pressure rotating storm system, experiences what is called a dramatic drop in atmospheric pressure over a short period of time. There's another phrase for it. It's called bombogenesis, and these bomb cyclones draw colder air from the north, which blast areas in the northern hemisphere with icy temperatures. And so here we are even seeing things like they've talked about thunder snows before, hoar frost, and the rest. All of this results in what some refer to as a winter storm Grayson, which has been predicted to bring as much as 24 inches of snow to Maine and New Hampshire. So, again, I'm thinking of those of you up there. Every year I get to go to Vermont and upstate New York, so I am well aware of what it is like in the summer up there, and I've also been up there many times in the winter and know what that is like as well. So lots of blizzard conditions expected in several other New England states. Philadelphia under a snow emergency. I have a friend of mine that went to a board meeting and is still stuck in Allentown, cannot make his way back to New Jersey because of that. And even some of our listeners in the South, as far south as North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia could see inches of snow, as well as even our listeners in Florida could receive an icy mix. So just want to let you know that it's cold here, but nothing like what you are facing. And so, again, our hearts and thoughts go out to you. Sometimes we talk about hurricanes and we talk about tornadoes and earthquakes. We don't necessarily, I think, have ever talked about a bomb cyclone. So that may be a first here on Point of View. So something to mention in that regard. Well, I'm talking about something that sounds like Armageddon. Let's have a little bit of fun here. Jim Garrity writes for the National Review, and he calls it Armageddon Part 4. Now, he's this is completely facetious and tongue placed in cheek, but he talks about how back in December, you might remember, the House Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi, said that if you pass this tax reform bill, she literally said, it's the end of the world. The debate in health care is like death. This is Armageddon. So, both on the health care issue and the tax reform issue, we were told that it was Armageddon. So Jim Garrity's been having some fun saying, well, Armageddon just does not end. And what he's doing is talking about all these different businesses that have actually decided to give $1,000 bonus to various individuals. And just a week ago, I went through a fairly significant list. All I'm going to do today is add to that list, and each time he says, Armageddon just won't stop. American Airlines and Southwest Airlines announced, this was on Tuesday, that they would pay employees bonuses of $1,000 each, a gesture that American said would cost them $130 million. Southwest also said it was exercising options to buy more jets from Boeing while delaying orders from some others. The Armageddon problem, and I put this in quotes, continues rolling through the banking community. Let's just take a couple here. U.S. Bank became the largest bank to take a similar action. U.S. Bancorp is really the parent company of U.S. Bank, and they announced that it is handing out a $1,000 bonus to its nearly 60,000 employees. The bank also plans to increase its minimum wage for hourly employees to $15 per hour. Additionally, this is from an article that came out, the bank will be making enhancements to its employees' health care options effective in the 2019 enrollment period. And the president and chief executive officer for Bancorp said, we believe that tax reform is positive for the U.S. economy because it provides an immediate opportunity to benefit our employees, our communities, and our customers. So it's hit the banks, it's hit the airlines, it's spread to the insurers. Armageddon moving its way through also the insurance companies. Let's take one. Columbus-based supplemental insurer Aflac will increase its investment in U.S. operations and employees by $250 million over the next 3 to 5 years due to the tax reform law. This, again, reading from one of the articles that came out. Specifically, Aflac workers will see the company's 401 match rise from 50% to 100% on the first 4% of employee contributions, with a $500 one-time contribution going to each staffer's 401k plan. The firm, well known for its Aflac Duck advertisements, also plans to offer certain hospital and accidents insurance products to employees at no charge. And finally, although I could go on and on, it's also spreading to air conditioner manufacturers. Aeon, which manufactures air conditioning units in a plant in Longview, said Tuesday that it will give $1,000 bonuses to all employees, excluding officers, in recognition of the federal tax overhaul. It also relates to fuel companies and a variety of others, but the list goes on and on. We won't probably spend any more time on that, other than just simply to say that we have seen a very positive response so far from some of these companies. And so that's just one more illustration of the fact that even though we were having people predict that this was the end of the world, it was Armageddon, it would going to destroy the middle class, there's still a lot of people, I would suspect maybe even a majority of Americans still, who believe that their taxes are going to go up. The businesses that have actually read the tax reform bill have come to the conclusion that, no, this is going to be a benefit not just for them in their corporations, but also for their various employees, and we've seen some of the reaction there as well. So let's take a break. When we come back, a couple things I want to talk about. Over these last many years, I have talked about some of these close elections, and we had one in Virginia which was a tie. We've had a number of these over the years, and this was, again, a very close election. Sometimes they flip a coin. In this case, they actually took a name out of a bowl, and it was more significant than ever because it will determine who the Speaker of the House is in the Virginia legislature. Then I want to get into the subject of marijuana. The Attorney General has decided that he is going to allow U.S. attorneys to actually decide whether or not to enforce our federal marijuana laws in those states that have legalized marijuana. So we'll get into that topic. And, of course, at any point, we'll give you a chance to join our conversation. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Although the concept of a free enterprise system developed primarily in Europe, it has become the most successful in the United States. Arthur Brooks, president of the American Enterprise Institute, has a possible explanation. The founders promoted a free market where Americans were able to truly live their liberty. Thomas Jefferson famously said in his first inaugural address, "A wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned." This is the sum of good government. People from other countries began to realize how exceptional America's culture of free enterprise was. French nobleman Alexis de Tocqueville called Americans the freest people in the world. He was struck by the fact that Americans pursued their interest under the supervision of limited government and banded together in voluntary associations. This is true to this day. According to Arthur Brooks, Europeans are half as likely as Americans to attribute success in their own life to their own efforts. He even suggests that some of this might even be genetic. It's part of the American DNA. We're a nation of immigrants. Immigrants tend to be entrepreneurs and willing to take risk for the possibility of prosperity. Arthur Brooks contends that we live in a 70-30 nation. A Pew Research Center poll asked a broad range of Americans this question. Generally, do you think people are better off in a free market economy? Almost 70% of respondents agree that we are better off in a free market economy. The good news is that 70% of Americans believe in free enterprise. The bad news is the other 30% are in control of important arenas in our society, such as the academy, media, and government. This will be our challenge for the years to come. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
That one's going to, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to talk about this decision by the Attorney General to allow U.S. attorneys to prosecute, if they so desire, federal regulations related to marijuana in states which have actually legalized marijuana. And in a minute, I'm going to get into this because it's not only a case in a few states, but in these upcoming 2018 elections. I think I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I guess, 12 different states that will also have some kind of initiative or referendum on that issue as well. So this is going to be one of those ongoing issues. We haven't talked about it for a while, so I'll get into it in just a minute. But before I do, I did mention close elections. Whenever I write about the importance of a single vote, I oftentimes cite some very significant stories, and I've collected many of them over the years of individuals which have had close elections, even ties. And some of them have been more significant than others. One, a friend of mine that was running for the legislature in Illinois, ended up losing on a coin flip, and then found out when she went to church that Sunday that she had a couple of dozen, I won't use the exact number, but a couple of dozen individuals that came up and said, "Oh, Penny, if I'd only known that it was going to be so close, I would have voted. You know, I was out of town and I should have gotten an absentee ballot, or I got home late and I didn't bother to go to the polls." And you know how you feel there. Of course, I've collected one from Ohio where an individual running for city council, again, it was a tie vote, lost on a coin clip, and then found out his son, who lives with them, had not voted, and his son, who lived across the street, had not voted for him. Don't you know, that was a little bit of a tense Thanksgiving dinner. But the most recent one comes from the state of Virginia. In the House of Delegates race, 94th District, after they actually drew the name out from a bowl, gave it to the Republican delegate, David Yancey. Now, the individual who was the Democrat, Shelley Simons, actually demanded a recount, and after they did a recount, they did have her winning by one vote. But since the board could not certify the results, the race went back to a tie. So both candidates stuck at 11,608 votes. 11,608 votes. And this one, perhaps even more significant. I might put it in future articles. I know our booklet coming out right now on Make Your Vote Count has some great stories in there, but this one may be even more significant because the determination of who the next Speaker of the House will be in the Virginia House of Delegates will be determined in large part by the fact that David Yancey's name was pulled out of a bowl. So again, if you've ever needed any evidence for why one vote counts, I've collected over the years many of these stories, and that is the most recent one. And, of course, the drawing just took place, and, of course, then we assume that David Yancey will be seated, and his vote will probably make a very significant difference in who the speaker is. Let's get into this issue of marijuana for just a minute. It's in the news because of a number of reasons, but one of those has to do with the fact that the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has decided that he's going to rescind a policy that has existed, which essentially let legalized marijuana flourish without any federal intervention. And you have to recognize that we have federal laws governing various kinds of drugs, and then you have different laws in a number of different states where you have recreational marijuana. And those are easy to find because the recreational marijuana ones are in the West Coast and Colorado. Then you have all sorts of states that have some kind of medical marijuana, and those are scattered all over the United States. And so then, of course, as I pointed out, you've got an election where, if I've counted right, it looks like 12 different opportunities for people to vote in or out, everything from recreational marijuana to medical marijuana. Depends on which state you're looking at and where the current reality is. And so, the argument that has been made for the decriminalization of marijuana is that, first of all, we shouldn't be putting people into jail for a recreational drug. Now, I've looked this up, and Jim Garrity gave some good numbers here. Less than 1% of people in state or federal prisons for drug crimes are doing time for mere possession of marijuana. And so that is not a big issue, but it's one to think about. Then, of course, if you legalize it, we know what has happened. There have been all sorts of studies and surveys that have come out over the last couple of years, which have really documented, I think, in very persuasive ways that, of course, once you make it available to adults, it finds its way into the hands of young people. And as an individual that grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, right around Berkeley, and certainly during the drug culture, I find it so interesting when you recognize that we now know much more about the detrimental impact of marijuana than we did, say, a few decades ago. And the second point, which is worth mentioning, is the potency of marijuana is much higher as well. One study, for example, found that the marijuana of today is simply not the same drug it was in the 1960s or 70s or 80s, much less the 1930s. This one coming from people like Bill Bennett and Robert White. Bill Bennett, by the way, first drug czar. It is often at least 5 times stronger, with the levels of the psychoactive ingredient THC averaging about 15% in the marijuana at dispensaries found in states that have legalized marijuana for medicinal, or in the case, of course, Colorado and other places, recreational use. And at the same time, we have to be concerned about the impact that this could have on young people. One article that appeared in the journal Current Addiction Reports found that regular pot use, again defined as once a week, among teenagers and young adults led to cognitive decline, poor attention and memory, and decreased IQ. Then they go on to point out that since few marijuana users limit themselves to once a week, the actual harm could be much worse for these developing brains. You have the American Psychological Association noting that young people who become addicted to marijuana lose an average of 6 IQ points at adulthood. Others peg the IQ loss much higher. And then one more, and then we'll take some phone calls. The British Journal of Psychiatry reviewed large studies. These were 4 large studies, all of which showed a significant and consistent association between consumption of marijuana, mostly during the teen years or early 20s, and the later development of schizophrenia. Likewise, a study published by the British medical journal Lancet concluded that marijuana use increases the risk of young people developing psychotic illness, such as schizophrenia. You can also look at the Journal of Neuroscience, in which they found significant abnormalities in 2 different brain structures doing brain scans, and these abnormalities in the working memory of your brain affect judgments, decisions, and planning. And the point I would make is that if this was a new drug being released by Big Pharma, you know that there would be an outcry. But because marijuana has had so many advocates and because it's, quote, natural, we find ourselves in a situation where more and more of the states are willing and more of Americans are willing to legalize marijuana. And, of course, it will be interesting to see what kind of conflict, if any, will develop. Because, again, these U.S. attorneys, they have the freedom to enforce federal marijuana laws, but they also have, if you will, the freedom not to. But by rescinding the policy, we'll see what transpires. So, if nothing else, I wanted to give you an advance look at this debate, which is going to surface, 1, because of the decision by the Attorney General, and 2, because we have at least a dozen states that will be engaged in all sorts of debates about whether or not to legalize marijuana for medical use, recreational use, or whatever it might be. Let's take some phone calls, and we'll continue those phone calls in the next half hour as well. We'll head to Ohio first. WGGN and Stephen, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you for accepting my call, and I just think it's a very interesting topic for the day.
Well, I know you have some opinions, so you have the floor.
All right. I did drugs when I was younger for over 20 years, and first off, anybody who tells you that pot doesn't lead you to something stronger, they're lying to you. It does. It did to me, and it did to everybody that I partied with back in the 70s and 80s. And thank God, though, because I became a Christian over 25 years ago, I left that lifestyle. But one of the main things is the people, I think they fail to think of that if your employer, no matter if the state has considered that drug consumption or pot, is okay, they don't realize that your employer, if they put it into their manual that if you're drug tested, and pot is one of those tests that they would do, and it's positive, you can still be fired.
Sure. And look at the NFL. Some of the NFL players say, hey, when we play the Denver Broncos, we're going to go out and try marijuana. Well, guess what? Then they get a drug test, and that can get into all sorts of difficulties, too. Stephen, I need to take a break. So can I keep you on? Because certainly would love to get your comments, but I have one of those mandatory breaks. And we'll take some more phone calls, too. 1-800-351-1212. Have other things to cover, but I just thought I'd give you an advance look on what I think is going to be an ongoing discussion and debate in 2018 on the subject of marijuana. So if you have some thoughts, we'd love to hear them, and we'll be right back.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention some of the other articles we've posted today, and we're going to see if we can get to those if we have time. If not, we'll cover some of those tomorrow. One having to do with fake news, which seems to be a topic every single day here on Point of View. One by Ben Shapiro, the America's Left in the Grip of Insanity. I might cover some of that when we get with Gary Bauer in the second hour, because some of that has to do with Iran, and one of the articles is one from Gary Bauer's end-of-day report on tumult in Tehran. So we'll get into some of those conversations with him in the second hour, and some of these election issues, and also some of the accomplishments for the Trump administration and what the agenda will be for 2018. So we've got a couple of articles there, but I did mention something that came across our desk about whether or not these U.S. attorneys would be given the freedom to enforce federal marijuana law, or whether they'll simply keep the policy that has been in existence, but it is no longer official. Before, there was a policy that basically let legalized marijuana to flourish without federal intervention. Now, with that policy being rescinded, is that going to make any difference? So we'll see where that plays itself out in the next couple of weeks. And, of course, it may become part of 2018 campaign issue. We were talking with Stephen in Ohio. I wanted to give you a final comment before we go and take a few more phone calls.
Yes, just I think that for the most part, what I think they're trying to do is once again try to desensitize people to what moral values are. And by doing this, I mean, pot does end up bringing down your inhibitions. It brings down even your work ethics. I remember when I would, do it, you just didn't want to do anything. You want to sit around, and it's like they don't take these things into consideration. And I think it'll be a major loss. We've even passed some things locally, and there was a city here in Ohio that passed a law that you could not have a grower in their area or come in to cultivate. And the problem, though, was that the people who actually put in a license previous to that law being made are now fighting because they, to my understanding, received their license, but now they're trying to go through this battle of, the law was made after the fact, but before they built anything. So now another issue comes around.
Yeah. And I do wonder where we go with this, because in some areas we allow federalism to take place. For example, you can go to one state and you might pay a sales tax. In other states you might pay a property tax and an income tax. And another one you might have just a property tax but no sales tax, or, all the variations. And that sort of sorts itself out. I'm thinking before we're through with all this, the marijuana issue is a little bit like the whole issue of same-sex marriage. And that is, you had some states where you're considered married because you were married in that state, and so it's a same-sex union. But in other states, then you're not considered to be married. Again, we could say, well, we can sort of control that because it's what happens within the state's jurisdiction in terms of recreational marijuana or medical marijuana. But this, again, is a place where you have a conflict between federal laws and state laws. I don't know. It could be a Supreme Court case someday, but we'll see. And nothing else, like I said before, I wanted to mention it for a few minutes because I think it's going to be a campaign issue in 2018 when I look at, looks like about a dozen different states are going to have some measure that the voters will be able to vote on, and whether that provides more states with recreational marijuana or whether or not that begins to move in another direction will be kind of interesting. So let's head to Arizona, KNLB, and Trina. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be on the show with you and kind of point out a few things that I've noticed. I've noticed that there is a severe impairment when somebody's behind the wheel, because we witnessed an accident where a man was behind the wheel under the influence of marijuana, and he didn't even realize he had an accident, and he didn't realize he had gotten stabbed in the back with a pitchfork that he had in the vehicle. And it's like, oh my goodness, people don't realize how dangerous it can be when you're impaired. And then also I've noticed that there's an increase from what I heard yesterday with women who are pregnant using marijuana. And there's been a whole litany of other things I've heard, like Mike Tyson wants to build a farm for marijuana for 40 acres and people saying that it cures cancer, and there's been no proof. So it's just, there's a whole litany of things, and it baffles my mind. And then I had a doctor wanted me to go on medical marijuana for my back, and I'm like, absolutely not.
Well, again, we have, some diagnoses where this seems to be helpful. And again, you can provide the oil or THC or whatever it might be. We also have, of course, as I mentioned just a minute ago, everything from the Journal of Psychiatry, Lancet, the Journal of Neuroscience, the American Psychological Association, just a few of the studies that I mentioned that share some of the dangers. And this is, again, just a kind of an interesting puzzle in terms of public policy, that at a time when we seem to know that there are more detrimental effects, that's a time when we have more and more states, and I'd say probably a majority of Americans that are ready to legalize not just medical marijuana, but recreational marijuana. But let's go back to the phones and give some of you a chance to join our conversation. We'll go to California this time. Leaf, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yeah, hello.
You're on the air.
Yeah, so all I ask is that I know a lot of your listeners are going to have a very conservative point of view, and that's understandable, and that's fine. But I would hope that as, hosting, you would try to remind them that a lot of the fear that they're feeling has been fed into them, and this is an herb that naturally exists on Earth. And yes, it's been altered genetically over human interaction.
Quite a bit, apparently. Yes.
When done and used correctly with intelligence and caution in the right situations, it can be helpful and useful. And the people who could be helped by it are shying away from it because the fear that has been fed into it, not by anything of their God, but by their government, and the fear that the church has passed on from that government is not from Jesus, is not from God, that fear exists. And it may be sacrilegious, it may sound that way, but it's not meant to be. There's a good chance that the Nepal ruderalis plant was enjoyed by any number of people who do exist in the Bible. Yes, I'm sure they still function. They were still good farmers.
Yeah, that's a bit of a speculation, but I do get your point here. And back to your point of, well, we're reversing trends. I'm not seeing that at all. I'm looking at this map right now, and I can only find 4 states, and some of them are going to have votes this time, that don't have at least cannabis oil, medical marijuana, or recreational marijuana. So the trend is not going in terms of a backlash or return to anything like the 1950s, 60s, or 70s. It's going in the other direction. And so, I get your point, but let me give a few more a chance to join our conversation here. We'll go to Bob in South Carolina. Bob, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Well, you're jousting in windmills. It's a done deal. Pandora's box was open with marijuana. You just said it. Pandora's box was open with alcohol. Alcohol is just as dangerous, maybe even worse. Pandora's box has been open with cigarettes. Nobody's stopping that. We're not going back to prohibition of the 30s. People talk about wrecks, texting. More wrecks are caused by texting than anything. There are laws against that. There you go.
We don't disagree with that.
It goes on. Now, I'm not advocating the use or not use of it. I'm just saying we've got so much airtime. What's the best use of your airtime? Man, we really need to tell people what this tax cut is doing for them. We need to understand, vote, go vote.
Yep. Well, and we certainly have done that, and we will do that in the second hour. So I'm not wasting too much text time to mention that this might be one of those votes that comes up in 2018. So let's take a break, and we'll come back. We've got a number of other things to mention here today. Second hour, we're going to spend some time with Gary Bauer, and we'll be looking at some of the accomplishments during the Trump administration so far, the agenda for 2018, which I do think is going to be kind of intriguing when we look at some of these votes in the Senate and the House, as well as some people have put together kind of their wish list. And I also want to get back to a conversation we had 2 days ago about Iran, and also get back to a conversation we had yesterday about Korea. So there's a lot of things to cover for sure, but I did want to give you an opportunity to express an opinion. When we come back, we have one more person waiting, and then we're going to move on to some other topics. And if you would like to join us on those topics, you're welcome to do so as well. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 1919, American mothers who lost their sons in World War I set about developing a war memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland. And there it has stood in peaceful silence for over 90 years, a visible reminder of the cost of freedom. But in October of 2017, a three-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit reasoned that because these mothers chose to memorialize their sons with a cross-shaped monument reminiscent of the grave markers of the thousands of American soldiers buried across Europe, the monument violates the Constitution. Not all the judges agreed. Chief Judge Gregory issued a strong dissent, reminding the court that the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment does not require the government to purge any reference to religion from the public square. He concluded, quote, "This memorial stands in witness to the valor, endurance, courage, and devotion of the 49 residents of Prince George's County, Maryland, who lost their lives in the Great War for the liberty of the world. I cannot agree that a monument so conceived and dedicated and that bears such witness violates the letter or spirit of the very Constitution these heroes died to defend," unquote. We agree with Judge Gregory. This is a veterans memorial. We will not break faith with the Gold Star mothers and the American Legion veterans who chose to remember their sons and brothers with this cross-shaped memorial. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
First article we posted here is Real News versus Fake News. I want to get into that in just a minute, an article by William Briggs, but let me just take one more phone call. This is an individual that's an EMT in Colorado, KTGW. Daryl, thank you for joining us today. I think you wanted to educate us, so you have the floor.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Kerby. I appreciate it. I love your show. I just wanted to kind of point out that what they've done with legalizing marijuana, they've used the guise of it's a natural herb and it has all of these medicinal purposes. And that is true to a degree. when marijuana was made illegal, they also made illegal hemp. And hemp is a textile product that is used to make many, many things. The difference is the medicinal properties of marijuana and hemp both come in the cannabinoids. It's the oils of the plant. There's 62 known cannabinoids, and those can be grown in hemp as well. The difference between hemp and marijuana, one of the main ones anyway, is the content of THC in the buds of the plant, the flowering part of the plant. What my concern is, the THC is what causes the psychoactive reactions in people, and also what causes the bad health issues, the reaction that your body has to it. As a matter of fact, in early 2017, our local coroner was the first one in the nation, actually, to claim a death was caused by a marijuana overdose. And so you can't tell me that it's a natural herb and that it is all completely safe. What I do think, though, is that with today's testing and such, while I don't advocate marijuana, excuse me, I am not completely opposed to hemp, but I think that we need to have some consistent nationwide regulation on it. I believe that we could bring hemp back as an actual agricultural product. We could harvest the cannabinoids out of it that could then be regulated through someone like the FDA and could be passed out through pharmacies and stuff to help these people with cancer, to help the people with rheumatoid arthritis, to help all of these things, but not to have the psychoactive ingredient of the THC. And we can maintain and keep marijuana illegal. And I understand we've opened Pandora's box, as the last caller said, but I also think that there's a way to go about this that we can rein in some of the rampant legalization and widespread uptick in use, especially by our young people, of marijuana to get high and still utilize the medical beneficial properties of the hemp, and also bring it back as a textile product for the suffering agricultural community in this nation.
I think you've got some very good ideas. And again, as I look at my map here of many of these states, matter of fact, most states have some kind of low cannabinoid. I always have trouble saying the word, with low THC. So, I mean, the medical benefits can be provided in a way that doesn't necessarily lead to some of those negative health issues. And nothing else. And also, again, I just, one more time will say, it is just so amazing to me that at a time when we know that there are so many more dangers, that's a time when we actually are going about legalizing it. Yeah, we have legalized alcohol. We have legalized cigarettes. Question I want to ask is, do we need one more opportunity to help people get high? And that seems to be generally where the country is going. So nevertheless, I wanted to bring this up because you will be hearing more about it. Maybe you've heard about it first here. The Attorney General deciding to allow U.S. attorneys now to aggressively enforce federal marijuana laws. Whether they will do so in some of these states, well, you give us an update. Some of you that live in places like Oregon, Washington, California, Colorado, to mention just a few, maybe you can tell us what's happening there, and we'll see how that plays out in the next couple of weeks and how it even maybe affects the next election cycle. Just before we take a break, though, let me mention that one of the articles I've posted here by William Briggs is, again, kind of hearkening back to the conversation we had yesterday on fake news and the conversation I had with you Tuesday on fake news. And that is, first of all, we have one particular group that has said that there are a couple of words and phrases they think should be banned from the English language. One is "let that sink in," and that's not going away. And the other is fake news. You know that one's not going away. But the point he is making in this piece here is that because at first Facebook said, look, there's no way we can really sort out fake news, but because so many people fussed about it, they're now testing all sorts of fake news detection algorithms. And again, as I mentioned just a minute ago, one of the things I did in graduate school is program computers, and I'm still kind of fascinated by some of this. But whether you look at Facebook, or now we have some college students who say they've developed a browser plugin that can alert users to fake news. And you even have a group of folks at Fake News Challenge believe they can harness artificial intelligence to identify made-up stories with an intention to deceive. In other words, propaganda. As much as we would love to think that computers and algorithms and artificial intelligence can do that, I think it's really dangerous. And as we've pointed out before, it probably makes a lot more sense for most of us to just read widely and make sure that if something doesn't sound quite right, to check it out and see if you can find it in another source. And for all the hue and cry, yesterday we mentioned in a study that was done by Dartmouth College, Princeton University, and the University of Exeter, in which they found that there were some Americans who did make their way to some of these fake news sites, but it was probably 10% or less of Americans, but they had to get their dig in and say that a number of them were deeply pro-Trump. Well, it's quite possible that if indeed you've been hearing Donald Trump on the campaign trail for a year say that CNN is fake news and ABC and NBC and CBS is fake news, you probably would be looking some other places to see if you could find validation for the stories. And as Chelsea Yeoman pointed out yesterday, when you look at those individuals who did go to, quote, a fake news site, it wasn't the only place they went. They went to a lot of different places. Now, if I were just out of curiosity to go to a fake news site, it doesn't mean I believe it. Matter of fact, I look at it, roll my eyes, and keep on going. So the concern about fake news, I think we're starting to find maybe is overplayed. And this new research that's come from Dartmouth and Princeton, I think, is a good illustration for just always look for what seems to be reasonable. And if it doesn't sound right, look at other sources. And if there's one thing we've tried to do here at Point of View, it's to post some articles. Today we've posted this article on real news versus fake news. Also one that I have not mentioned, but I might get into in the second hour by Ben Shapiro with the conversation we'll have with Gary Bauer on America's left in the grip of insanity. And that kind of relates a little bit to some of the conversation about Iran. The third article is from Our American Values, the end-of-day report on tumult in Tehran, and then one on the negative press coverage of Donald Trump. We're going tomorrow to get into the issue of religious liberty, posted a couple of very important articles about that, as well as some other topics as well. So there's just all sorts of things that we try to post on the website so that you can find those articles and research them for yourself. You know as well as I do that if you've listened to this program any length of time, you'll tell somebody in a conversation that you heard something. They'll look at you and go, well, where have you heard that? I've not heard that anywhere. And you say, well, I found it on the radio program Point of View. They'll say, well, how do I know it's true? Well, again, pointofview.net, find the article. You can read it for yourself, or you can go to that article and hit the share button, put it on your Facebook page, or send it as an email and say, here's the facts and figures that I found. If you find something that's wrong, let us know. If nothing else, I hope that would be a reason for you to consider what you might do to support us as we come into this new year. We do depend upon your financial support. If you want to click on that button that says donate, we would greatly appreciate it. We come back, Gary Bauer with us as we talk about what happened in 2017, what's going to unfold in 2018. We'll be right back.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, we came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture. Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team. or call 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we have with us Gary Bauer. What a great opportunity to kind of look back over 2017 and see what has happened under the Trump administration, to look ahead to 2018. As we've mentioned just a few minutes ago, we have a number of elections that are going to be taking place and all sorts of initiatives that are certainly part of this. If you're not familiar with Gary Bauer, first of all, let me just mention that he is, of course, the head of American Values. Our third article we've posted here is one of his end-of-day reports entitled Tumult in Tehran. So we're going to probably talk a little bit later about Iran, certainly talk about North Korea. His post today is on Trump versus Bannon, so we'll probably get into that. But we thought we'd start out with some of the positives as well, because after all, there are a number of things that have taken place this year that we need to remind ourselves of. And if you're not familiar with Gary Bauer, served under the Reagan administration's chief domestic policy advisor, is the chairman of the Campaign for Working Families, and of course the head of American Values. Gary, Happy New Year.
Well, Happy New Year to you, Kerby. Great to be with you today.
You've got to be upbeat. Almost every time we have you on, usually there's some major foreign policy disaster, domestic policy disaster, and here we're going to be talking about such things as the confirmation of Judge Neil Gorsuch, or Justice Neil Gorsuch. We're talking about a GDP over 3%. We're talking about a tax reform bill. We're talking about moving ahead on the Keystone XL pipeline, the withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord. I'm thinking continuing the Mexico City policy. This has got to be good days for Gary Bauer. What do you think?
Well, Kerby, I keep I'm fearful I'm going to wake up from this dream. This has been really an amazing year, and it is nonetheless, excuse me, kind of sad that I don't think, because of media coverage, that perhaps all the general public get it, but you just went down a list of things that for any president in their first term, let alone their first year, to accomplish those things, would be just extraordinary. You can add to that list the number of people on food stamps has dropped by 2 million since Donald Trump took office 1 year ago. You mentioned Gorsuch, but every month there are more Constitution-believing conservative judges being put on all the federal courts as he nominates them. Unemployment at record lows, the stock market at record highs. The list just goes on and on and on, and not the least of which, and I think you alluded to it, is that our enemies fear us again, which they did not under Barack Obama, and our friends and allies trust us again, which they no longer did after 8 years of the last president. So this is amazing, given that we had this big resistance campaign, that all these things have been accomplished. And I think even better days are ahead, assuming that the president and Vice President Pence and conservatives can survive the onslaught that is being waged to basically overturn the last election.
Let's, for just a minute, since you mentioned that, and you are involved in the media, and I am as well, and I've done radio, and of course I do radio, recognize why the American people don't know this. And the fourth article we posted here comes from the Washington Examiner, but also you can find it in the Pew Research, finding that the media was 3 times more negative for Donald Trump than for Barack Obama, which amazes me. There's only 3 times because they only found 5% positive. So that's one reason. The other is, let's just be honest, Donald Trump sometimes can snatch distraction in the midst of victory because those tweets of his sometimes cause the media to focus on something he says, whether right or wrong, whether proper or improper, sometimes even crude or boorish. And so as a result, the American people probably, if they're listening today, might be hearing about some of the successes that just haven't been covered at all by the mainstream press.
Well, that's a great point. In in some ways, this is sort of a chicken and egg problem. The media is so negative, and that leads President Trump, I think, to use Twitter more.
I see. Yeah, and I don't disagree. I think that's he actually has more people on his Twitter account than to listen to or watch ABC, NBC, or CBS. So that certainly is the case.
That's right. And now the downside is that, I worked in the Reagan White House, and before Ronald Reagan would say something, put out a paper, put out a statement, do a press conference, there would be multiple people who would look at the idea or the thought or the plan before he did it.
Yes.
Because we wanted to have the chance to give him a heads up. Well, Mr. President, maybe the better word there would be this. And of course, when you have a president in the age of tweeting that tweets, you don't have that kind of a check. And there are times, I think even the president would admit that he'll read a tweet and go, maybe I could have phrased that better. But it is still a remarkable vehicle to counter the media narrative of the day.
Well, let's spend just a few minutes, and we're going to take a break in just a minute there to talk about some of the successes. And we talked about Neil Gorsuch, but another one, and I won't spend much time on it because we have Kelly Shackelford in studio tomorrow, as we oftentimes do. But in addition to that, you have more individuals that were confirmed for the circuit court than in the modern history of the presidency. He broke the record set by first John F. Kennedy, also by Richard Nixon. And again, I would think most people, and I've had some people say, I just hadn't heard anything about these individuals being confirmed to the Circuit Court of Appeals. And that's just another surprise, given the fact that if I were doing this interview with you 6 months ago, it didn't look quite so good. But when it was all said and done, he was moving quite a number through the United States Senate and putting them in positions of influence.
That's exactly right. And a tip of the hat to Senator Mitch McConnell, who I criticized and others criticized because these judges weren't moving fast enough. There was even some people irritated at Senator Grassley, who's chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, another Republican like President Trump and Mitch McConnell. And he was a little hesitant to bend Senate rules or abandon some traditions. But ultimately, I think they realized what was happening, which was the left was trying to make sure that, first, they could get Donald Trump out of office, and second of all, that they could immediately go back to the failed policies and left-wing court decisions on the sanctity of life, religious liberty, many other issues. So I think these guys woke up, and we now have had a lot of progress. And look, another Supreme Court vacancy is coming. We all know that. It may be tomorrow. It could be next month. The odds are fairly strong it'll be sometime in 2018.
Pretty amazing. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Gary Bauer. Let me first of all encourage all of you as listeners to sign up for his end-of-day report. Somehow I was not receiving it on one of my emails, so I signed up again today, and that one has to do with Trump versus Bannon. And we have a link to ouramericanvalues.org, your voice to help protect family, faith, and freedom. So we're going to come back. Let's talk about some of the pro-life, pro-family issues. Again, I don't know that many people 2 years ago would have predicted, first of all, a President Donald Trump and a Donald Trump with so many pro-life, pro-family initiatives. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Although the concept of a free enterprise system developed primarily in Europe, it has become the most successful in the United States. Arthur Brooks, president of the American Enterprise Institute, has a possible explanation. The founders promoted a free market where Americans were able to truly live their liberty. Thomas Jefferson famously said in his first inaugural address, "A wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned." This is the sum of good government. People from other countries began to realize how exceptional America's culture of free enterprise was. French nobleman Alexis de Tocqueville called Americans the freest people in the world. He was struck by the fact that Americans pursued their interest under the supervision of limited government and banded together in voluntary associations. This is true to this day. According to Arthur Brooks, Europeans are half as likely as Americans to attribute success in their own life to their own efforts. Even suggests that some of this might even be genetic. It's part of the American DNA. We're a nation of immigrants. Immigrants tend to be entrepreneurs and willing to take risk for the possibility of prosperity. Arthur Brooks contends that we live in a 70-30 nation. A Pew Research Center poll asked a broad range of Americans this question. Generally, do you think people are better off in a free market economy? Almost 70% of respondents agree that we are better off in a free market economy. The good news is that 70% of Americans believe in free enterprise. The bad news is the other 30% are in control of important arenas in our society, such as the academy, media, and government. This will be our challenge for the years to come. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Gary Bauer with us today, American Values, your voice to help protect family, faith, and freedom. And Gary, you know, 2 years ago, or even during the 2016 presidential primary, if you were to ask our pro-life listeners, who would you vote for? They'd say, well, I certainly believe that you got people like Ted Cruz that are pro-life and Marco Rubio, and you could say Mike Huckabee and Rick Santorum. I don't think anybody would mention Donald Trump. Okay, explain this enigma. During the first week under the Trump administration, they reinstated and expanded what's called the Mexico City policy, and you can explain that in just a minute because it happened during the administration you were part of, but essentially blocks $9 billion of our foreign aid from being used in abortions. He also worked with Congress on a bill that overturned Obama regulations that up until recently blocked states from defunding, say, Planned Parenthood. In some respects, and I can go through some others, this was the kind of pro-legislation I would expect from a Ted Cruz, a Marco Rubio, or, of course, a Mike Pence. Maybe that's the reason. But it wasn't what I would have expected necessarily from Donald Trump, and that's exactly what we have.
Well, it's a great summary, Kerby. You know, many of us, and I include myself in that number, had concerns when Donald Trump began to get traction in the early Republican primaries about where he would be on some of these social issues, and particularly the sanctity of life, which I think we both agree if America doesn't ultimately get that right, we're not going to get anything right. And interestingly enough, as the competition in the primaries proceeded, Donald Trump made a real concerted effort to explain to people that he was pro-life, why he was pro-life. And what impressed me, Kerby, was in one of the debates, and I forget which number it was, with Hillary Clinton, he asked his debate preparers, how can we make sure, he said, that the abortion issue comes up in the debate? Because I want to go after Hillary Clinton's extremist views on abortion, where she's in favor of abortion even in the 7th and 8th month of the pregnancy. And that's exactly, you'll recall, that's exactly what he did in that one debate. So whether it was a calculation on his part, or whether it's something he really believes, he did what really, the only thing that really matters once he got into office, he took action. And I don't know if you recall this, another way this issue came up was on the court appointments. And I remember how astonished I was when at one point he said, no more stealth strategy. I'm not going to do this thing that Republicans have done where they nominate somebody to be on the Supreme Court and you can't prove they're pro-life because they've never written or said anything about it or had a case on it. He said, my candidates will be pro-Constitution, pro-life, pro-religious liberty, and so forth. And that appears to be exactly what he's doing on these court of nominees, not only on Gorsuch, but on the lower federal courts.
Yeah, and you notice that on those various individuals. Again, we mentioned those judges. We've talked about this before when he's gone to the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation and even First Liberty and some others. That is certainly the case. You are certainly known for an individual that even before that worked for the Family Research Council and, of course, was a vice president focused on the family. What about the family issues? This tax reform issue, I don't think people realize that when you double the standard deduction and you increase the child care credit and a few other things, this is tremendously helpful to families, is it not?
It's an incredible boost for middle American families. And again, because of the sort of propaganda campaign saying that this was a terrible tax bill and nobody but billionaires would get a tax break, I'm not sure the American public even now fully understands and won't until a couple more weeks go by and they begin to notice that their paycheck is bigger, that it really is pro-family, it's pro-working class, pro-middle class. And in addition to all that, Kerby, it is, by I think all accounts now, even skeptical economists are admitting that it is likely, this tax bill, to spur greater economic growth. And, of course, the number one thing that families care about financially is to be able to provide for themselves, for their children, to have to be able to buy a home, to be able to access a higher education for their children, particularly if the parents never had a chance to go on to college. And I believe we're going to get a tremendous, more protracted economic expansion. There's already evidence of that in this first year of the Trump administration, but I believe it will go on for some time, and it's very hard to be able to quantify the positive impact of all of that on the typical American family.
Gary Bauer with us, and let's see if we can talk a little bit about some of the foreign policy issues. The third article we've posted actually is Gary Bauer's end-of-day report, and that came out, I guess, on Tuesday. And while you were writing that report, I was saying on the air the very same thing, and that is, I'm sure you agree with me, I see a stark difference between the Obama administration's reaction to violence and protest in the streets in 2009 compared to the Trump administration, and in particular the tweet from Donald Trump happening in 2018. Talk about that, if you might.
Well, that's right. In 2009, there was a popular uprising in Iran against the radical Islamist supremacists that run that country. And if you go back and look at what President Obama said during that time, he was very nonchalant about it. He said, look, this is a decision for the Iranian people. It doesn't have anything to do with me or the United States, and we're certainly not going to intervene or interfere or get involved in Iranian domestic politics. What we found out later, he was taking this position, almost the position of neutrality, because he was in the middle of secret negotiations with Iran at the time on a nuclear deal. And he didn't want to rock the boat. He didn't want to say anything that would irritate the Iranians. So you fast forward to now, when we've seen these spontaneous demonstrations break out in Tehran and a couple dozen other cities around the country, and President Trump and Vice President Pence almost immediately went online on Twitter and through other vehicles to express our support for the Iranian people, that they too deserve freedom and liberty and the right to determine their own lives and their own beliefs and philosophy, etc. I couldn't help but notice, Kerby, not only was there no statement by ex-President Obama, there was nothing coming out of the United Nations. There was nothing coming out of the European Union. Most of the world was looking the other way. You know, the other day I commented that if some Israeli Jew adds an extra bedroom to his house in East Jerusalem, there's an emergency meeting of the United Nations General Assembly. You know, this is endangering peace. But when people are being mowed down in the streets of Tehran by a dictatorial regime who regularly promises that they're going to destroy Israel and destroy us, the silence was deafening. So I think that these statements by the president and vice president doesn't mean we're going to get militarily involved. Nobody's suggesting that. But what it does mean is that those people in Iran hear and read these statements, and they know that a powerful nation is on their side. And I think that's an encouragement, and we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out in the months ahead.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Gary Bauer. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, or sit back because we have a little bit more to cover. Obviously, we already alluded to Israel, and that is another issue of the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, and a few other issues. Of course, Donald Trump the other day had a back and forth on his tweet with Kim Jong-un, who said he had a nuclear button on his office desk, and Donald Trump said, well, someone from this depleted and food-starved regime, please inform him that I, too, have a nuclear button. It is much bigger, more powerful than his, and my button works. So we've got to get some comments from Gary Bauer on that and a few other issues, but we'd love to hear your comments as well, because we also want to look ahead to 2018. The election season will be upon us. We've already mentioned a couple of those issues in the first hour that might be front and center. And so if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know more about American values, we have a link to ouramericanvalues.org. I would certainly encourage you to sign up to get the end-of-day report. It is must-reading. It certainly is around this round table, and we would certainly encourage you to make sure that you get it as well. Let's take a break. Gary Bauer with us. We'll continue with him right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour with Gary Bauer still with us with American Values. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Gary, I always have to do something that makes your head explode or raise your blood pressure a little bit, and that is our third article. I guess it was the second article we posted. And like you, sometimes I read what some of the very strident left are saying about Donald Trump, and this one by Ben Shapiro I thought was a good summary, where you have individuals saying that the Iranian protest, hashtag resistance, at Women's March are all the same. And what Ben Shapiro says is, this is nuts. I mean, he says only crazy people on the right believe that Barack Obama's governance was morally equivalent to the Iranian government. But on the other hand, you have all sorts of people on the left, including this commentator for the Huffington Post, that really believe that Donald Trump is mere steps removed from the Ayatollahs. There are just there's a lot of hyperbole, a lot of hysterics, a lot of rhetoric right now, but some of it is just beyond the pale, and it maybe is something that you've never seen even in all the years you've worked there in Washington, D.C.
Well, you're absolutely right, Kerby. I mean, some of this stuff, it's insane. And, you know, it gets back to this theme that, you know, really wasn't just on the fringes. It was a lot of mainstream leftists got into of suggesting that the president was the equivalent of Adolf Hitler and that conservatives are the equivalent of Nazis and fascists. And I'm sure you've noticed that, you know, it doesn't stop there. In the last year or so, just the most normal things that conservatives believe are now routinely being labeled racist, bigoted, etc. So if you believe that we ought to secure our borders because if a nation doesn't have well-defined and protected borders, it really isn't a nation, that's supposed to be racist. And you could go on with a long, long list, but more important than any of those is, in fact, this attack on the president and on Vice President Pence and on conservatives generally, suggesting that they are the American equivalent of the Taliban, of Al-Qaeda, of all sorts of evil things. It's one of the reasons that it becomes almost impossible to bring the country together, to get anything done in this country, in Washington, D.C. And by the way, Kerby, a final reminder on this, you know, there was a time in our history in the 1950s when some people, the most notable one was Congressman McCarthy, began first looking for communists in the government, and there were some. And it was good that they were exposed. But then it went too far, and they were labeling everybody a communist. And that became known as McCarthyism, smearing somebody by just sticking a label on them with no proof. And I believe what the left today, including many mainstream left-wing newspapers and TV shows and so forth, are engaged in is a form of left-wing McCarthyism, where they label anybody that's pro-life, pro-family, believes in small government, lower taxes, a Nazi or a fascist. It's disgusting, it's damaging to our country, and it's got to stop.
Well said. Let me, if I can, even point out that in some cases the left's insanity caused them to hurt their own cause, because Kelly Shackelford has pointed out that in some cases you've had a nominee that was put forward by President Barack Obama, but even so the Democratic leadership in the Senate slow walks it. Or let's come back to an issue you mentioned a minute ago in terms of Israel. This bill that said we would recognize Jerusalem as a capital of Israel came about in 1995 when Bill Clinton was president. But Bill Clinton didn't do it. George W. Bush didn't do it. Barack Obama hasn't done it. And, of course, Donald Trump says he's going to do it. And that leads to 128 nations in the United Nations voting to condemn what was something that was a law on the books since 1995. Speak to that issue, if you might.
It was astonishing to watch that whole debate and the developments that ended up taking place, Kerby. Jerusalem has been the city of the Jewish people for literally thousands of years, and it's been recognized by Israel itself as its capital almost immediately after the modern nation of Israel was reestablished in 1947. If you look around the world, when a country exists, nobody generally argues when they tell you what their capital is. That's just part of the sovereignty that a nation enjoys, and that sovereignty goes for a country like Russia that was a communist dictatorship and said, by the way, our capital is Moscow. And everybody said, oh, okay. And they put their embassies in Moscow. But when it came to Israel, this idea took hold that somehow Jerusalem could not be the capital of the Israeli people, that the rest of the world would decide that Jerusalem would either be given over to some other group or that by edict of the United Nations it would be divided. Well, the American people have always rejected this idea, which is why, as you point out, going all the way back to the Clinton administration, there were votes in Congress on the idea that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel and that the U.S. Embassy ought to be moved there. But interestingly enough, and not surprisingly, it ends up these votes were really for show. Politicians wanted to let a pro-Israel American public know that they were pro-Israel too. But when it actually came to moving the embassy, none of these previous presidents wanted to do it. Donald Trump said he would do it. He got into office. There was tremendous pushback to prevent him from doing it. I know that to be true because I was involved in the battle and was brought over to the White House a couple of times to help in this battle. And lo and behold, he declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, just as Israel said it is, and plans are underway to move the embassy. But, man, does this stick in the throat of the left, and it has caused, as you point out, this backlash in the United Nations. Now, Kerby, I don't know if you've thought about this. Most of these countries voting that Jerusalem cannot be the capital of Israel. Jerusalem was the center of Israel life and of Jewish life before most of those countries ever existed.
That's right. That's right.
So it's extraordinary to think of some of the people sitting in judgment of the most democratic nation in the Middle East.
By the way, if you go to the website for American Values, you're never going to find a greater friend for Israel than Gary Bauer, and he certainly has been with us in the past talking about some of the other initiatives they've been involved with. But before I take some phone calls, let me come to at least North Korea. Now, we are dealing with an unstable individual for sure, Kim Jong-un. Unfortunately, some of our liberal friends think that both individuals are unstable, and part of that is because, indeed, Donald Trump in one of his tweets said, "I have a nuclear button, and it's a bigger button." Sounds like something I'd hear on a high school playground, but how do we think through what is happening in North Korea, especially with the Winter Olympics about ready to unfold and with all the saber-rattling of Kim Jong-un?
Well, the North Korean government for at least 20 years has been on a search, a program, an effort to become a nuclear power and to get the long-range missiles it needs to deliver those nuclear weapons to anybody in the world that crosses them. During that period of time that North Korea has been doing this, we've had multiple presidents, including Barack Obama, George W. Bush, the other George Bush, Bill Clinton, all of these presidents, Republican and Democrats, that have sought a diplomatic way, a low-key, let's try to work this out, surely North Korea, can be talked out of it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those efforts by all those presidents were a complete failure. We've gone from a time when North Korea could not have done anything to the United States to now a North Korea that has nuclear weapons and appears to be on the very verge, the very edge of having an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, that's accurate enough that it would be able to hit any U.S. American city. So that didn't happen under Donald Trump. They didn't get these missiles and these atomic weapons beginning on Inauguration Day. They got them. That most of the progress on it was made during the Obama years when Obama did absolutely nothing. And so Donald Trump finds himself with this mess. At this point, he's got an incredible challenge. He's got to convince North Korea they cannot use those weapons. And that's what he was trying to do with that tweet.
Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Gary Bauer and take some phone calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 1919, American mothers who lost their sons in World War I set about developing a war memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland. And there it has stood in peaceful silence for over 90 years, a visible reminder of the cost of freedom. But in October of 2017, a three-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit reasoned that because these mothers chose to memorialize their sons with a cross-shaped monument reminiscent of the grave markers of the thousands of American soldiers buried across Europe, the monument violates the Constitution. Not all the judges agreed. Chief Judge Gregory issued a strong dissent, reminding the court that the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment does not require the government to purge any reference to religion from the public square. He concluded, quote, "This memorial stands in witness to the valor, endurance, courage, and devotion of the 49 residents of Prince George's County, Maryland, who lost their lives in the Great War for the liberty of the world. I cannot agree that a monument so conceived and dedicated and that bears such witness violates the letter or spirit of the very Constitution these heroes died to defend," unquote. We agree with Judge Gregory. This is a veterans memorial. We will not break faith with the Gold Star mothers and the American Legion veterans who chose to remember their sons and brothers with this cross-shaped memorial. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Gary Bauer with us today with American Values. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to, first of all, Texas, KCTA. David, thank you for joining our conversation today.
Thank you. I just want to make a couple of brief comments. You've been talking about the left and how outlandish their slander has gotten. Well, one of the issues I have is very early on when Trump got elected, a second cousin of mine referred to Trump as Hitler. And, you know, it was very early in the conversation, very early in its presidency. And, you know, eventually I just had to say, hey, we can't talk about this anymore because I can't maintain my cool with you making such outlandish claims.
Right.
And then recently I read in One News Now that John Piper compared him to Kim Jong-un. And, I said, on what basis? What has he done? Where has his totalitarianism come out? So I want to just kind of probably people I'm thinking about aren't necessarily listening to a point of view, but
sure.
It's invaded the Christian church, even within the millennial population. They don't have a clue about, conservative Christian values, and it is just so frustrating. I think maybe God is doing a God sent, in sending Trump, but, I was reluctant to vote for him. But I think the second thing that might be happening is in relation to the tax reform bill where they pulled the charity contribution out of it. I think I understand that that's happened, but I'm not quite sure because I haven't looked at it.
No, they have not. But
maybe,
yeah.
But just maybe, the pulpits need to start preaching about moral values and also, where we stand on some of these political issues, even if it means losing their tax-free status.
Yeah. And Gary Bauer, I know you've heard this before. First of all, one of the reasons I posted Ben Shapiro's column today, and I also did a commentary that came out 2 days ago called Hysterics and Hyperbole, was just to minister to some of the people that say, am I wrong when somebody says that this individual is no different than the Ayatollahs in Iran? Am I the one that's wrong when I don't see this individual as Hitler in the 21st century? I mean, it sometimes you're so around people that have sort of lost any kind of sanity that you begin to wonder if you're the crazy person. You know what I mean?
No, I do know what you mean. And, of course, that's the purpose of this. It's to make good and decent people hesitate and make them think, well, maybe I'm the one that's missing something. So I would just say to David and all of your listeners, Kerby, this is ridiculous. Look, you can disagree with Donald Trump because maybe you think abortion's good. That's strange to me, but some people out there think abortion's a great right. You may be against him because you want government to be bigger, or you think taxes are too low, or maybe that American foreign policy ought to be more friendly instead of whatever. It's fair enough, disagreements, but the idea that any of the views that Donald Trump has could be compared to Hitler or fascism or Nazism is simply nothing but a big lie that is meant to destroy him and to frighten good, particularly good conservative Christians into being afraid to support him. And I think it just is indicative of the battle that is underway for the heart and soul of this country. The left was so close to winning everything, and along comes this guy, a little bit wild at times. Sometimes his language always isn't perfect, etc., but he knows how to throw a punch and take a punch in defense of our values. And he is rolling back a lot of the damage that's been done in recent years. And for that, many people, particularly in this city, in Hollywood and in the media, hate him for the success that he is having right now.
Let me, if I can, put on your hat for just a minute as the chairman of Campaign for Working Families, because as we look ahead, I'm already starting to prepare our people for the fact that there is a 2018 election. Yeah. You have 24 Democratic Senate seats, 2 independents. So basically the independents caucus with the Democrats. So 26 that are Democrat or independent. Some of those in states that Donald Trump won, you only have 8 Republican seats that have to be defended. Most of them look pretty safe to me. Maybe I'm missing something. But we've been hearing about this blue wave coming. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, but it seems like there could be just as easily a red wave coming. What's going to go on?
I think we got a decent chance to add to the majority in the Senate. I see 2 Republican seats that might be in trouble. I see maybe 5 Democrat liberal senators that could be in trouble. So that could be a net plus. I'm more worried in the House of Representatives, where there are a number of Republican congressmen in suburban areas in states that Hillary Clinton won that could be in jeopardy. And I have no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that if the House goes to the left and has a Democrat majority, they will try to impeach President Trump. And they won't stop there. They'll also try to figure out a way to remove Vice President Pence.
So again, just another issue to pay attention to. This, before I let you go, talk about what is available at Our American Values. Of course, I've promoted a couple of times today, end-of-day report, but there are all sorts of other resources that are available for some of our listeners. So talk about those.
Sure. You can get different reports we're putting out, research and so forth, copies of speeches that we've given, videos that you might find useful on various subjects. We're right in the middle of the battle, and fortunately, from being in Washington so long, I'm often over at the White House, so we try through the end-of-day report and other vehicles to give you the kind of inside information that you may not be hearing anywhere else other than on places like Point of View. So we welcome anybody that would like to take a look.
Gary, thank you for giving us an hour today. I know your time is very precious, but we certainly benefit so much by taking a quick look back and looking ahead, and we'll be watching all these various issues unfolding and watch this campaign that will unfold very quickly here in a number of cases around this country, not only just in the state and local areas, the federal areas, but also some of these judicial nominees and all the rest. It's a lot of things that we should be paying attention to, so thank you for being our eyes and ears there in Washington, D.C.
Always great to be with you, Kerby, and let's keep on fighting the good fight, and I think many successes will be coming our way.
Well, again, Gary Bauer with us with ouramericanvalues.org if you want to get more information, and we have all of that at our website, pointofview.net, in case you would like to address that, ouramericanvalues.org. You can find out more about the end-of-day report. You can see some of the videos, and, of course, I would encourage you to consider what you might do to support him as well. As we come to an end of our Thursday program, let me just mention that tomorrow, Friday, is our weekend edition, and we're going to talk about a couple of things. Kelly Shackelford will be with us, and first of all, he's identified a couple of areas where our religious liberty is being threatened. And then a very good piece that we have posted, and it will be up tomorrow, by Rebecca Hagelin on how 2018 could be the year of religious liberty. So we'll see how that plays itself out. We'll be looking at a couple of other issues. We mentioned yesterday and even today Donald Trump's tweet. And what about this in terms of his character, but also in terms of some of his accomplishments? And so I want to get some perspective on that. And, of course, we'll have a variety of other issues that we will try to bring to the table. And if you'd like to join the conversation, I would encourage you to give us a call then. Just before we run out of time, let me just mention that, again, we have all sorts of material for you available at our website today, pointofview.net. If you can click on that button that says donate, we'd greatly appreciate that as well. Andrew and Steve, thanks for your help. Look forward to seeing you here tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition.
When I heard Point of View explain about secular humanism, it drove us to really begin a school.
More than 30 years ago, Rodney Hare heard about a pressing need for the children of his community, and he took action, starting Liberty Christian School, that today provides excellent